Okay, good evening, everybody. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank all the legislators who are here and those who aren't here who worked with us and with one another over the course of several months. Because if you will remember, we actually had a redistricting session that took up the month of February, and then this 3-month session started in March. But another session's in the books, and quite frankly, I'm very happy with the way the session turned out. You don't always get everything that you want. Sometimes you get some things you don't want, but on balance, very pleased with what's happened. I've talked to you about the budget before, but I'm going to revisit that because I think that it is not just a responsible budget this year, but it is transformative in the way that it makes historic investments, how it continues our practice that we started on day one when we were $2 billion short of not using one-time money for recurring expenditures. But it is truly a transformational budget. Rick Ward had his farewell speech this morning, Senator Ward. He talked about the generational impact that our actions can have by doing good for people, especially when it comes to education. And I think that that's what this bill, I should say the money bills, do for us. Invest in education. $17 million for LA4, Early Childhood Program, $27 million for Early Childhood Supports and Services. We know that we have too many kids who by the second grade are not reading at grade level, and they're not performing other things at grade level either. And we don't do a very good job of catching them up. The truth is, no state does a very good job of catching them up, but we have too many of our kids, more than other states, who are behind. So early childhood is so important to prevent those children from being behind in the first place. And so this is what I mean when I talk about transformational change for our state. And if we will find the will and muster the discipline to make sure that we maintain these investments for a generation, it will change our state in ways that we can hardly fathom today. Budget also includes a $1,500 pay raise for teachers, $750 for support personnel. Now, this is the 7th time that I've been governor that we have had a House Bill 1 general appropriations bill. It's the 5th time we had a pay raise for teachers. And that's the largest pay raise that we've had. And I'm very proud of that. Yeah, I think it could and should have been a little bit bigger, but at the end of the day, it's still the biggest we've had over the time that I've been governor. We also have $159.2 million for higher education in terms of a plus for their budget. That's a 12% increase. I think that's the largest year-over-year increase in our history. And what truly puts that in perspective, when you look at what was happening before I became governor, we had the largest disinvestment in higher education in the nation. And it served us very poorly. And so being able to reverse that trend and focus on our people, increase opportunity, I think is incredibly important. And by the way, we want opportunity for everybody. And so these dollars have a focus on affordability, which in addition to TOPS, includes a historic GO grant increase of $15 million, $10.5 million to fully support the state's new MJ Foster program for adult learners created last year. If we're going to reach our goal for higher education, that master plan of having 60% of our adults with a post-secondary degree or credential by 2030, you've got to reach the adults. You can't start with those people who are just now leaving high school. This is incredibly important. $31.7 million is allocated for faculty pay raises. That's the largest state-funded faculty pay raise in 15 years. And by the way, I wish it could be more. We are in a competition with other states, universities and institutions in other states for top flight faculty. And we want to encourage people, just like we want to encourage them to become teachers, to be faculty, so that we can recruit and retain them here in Louisiana. But there's also $312.8 million in capital outlay for higher education, the largest allocation. By the way, 50 million of that is for deferred maintenance, and that's also the largest. We've also made massive investments in infrastructure, nearly $1 billion more than the state has recently invested in transportation. Some of the highlights include $22.5 million for passenger rail, $200 million for the Calcasieu River Bridge, $300 million for a new Mississippi River Bridge here in Baton Rouge, and $200 million for the I-49 South Connector. And there's lots of other projects, and then you have a considerable investment for preservation and maintenance as well. Obviously, those were all one-time dollars. But this is where we start making those really crucial investments to make sure that people know that we have our house in order. We've taken the opportunity this year to pay off $831 million in debts. That includes right at $70 million in the unfunded accrued liability of the state retirement system, $135 million into the self-insurance fund swept by the prior administration. This funding will be used to repay funds owed to FEMA. That was that problem that was caused when you were sweeping one-time money to pay recurring expenditures. We're actually having to pay some of that back now, but at least we're doing it. The second $400 million payment on the plan for the Hurricane Storm Damage Risk Reduction System non-federal match that we owe, we'll be making that second $400 million payment here very shortly, and $226 million in storm-related debt payments. All of these are incredibly important for our state, and there's more. $500 million for the Unemployment Trust Fund so that we can hopefully avoid the mandated tax increase when the September REC recognizes the fund balance that is too low per our statutes, and that is a tax increase on every employer who pays into the system. We have $120 million in surplus funding to go towards coastal restoration and protection. The 2023 annual plan for CPRA was approved unanimously. It includes $1.3 billion in investments, and it is so important that we get above the $1 billion number because that plan is predicated on a minimum of $50 billion over 50 years. And so if you're not averaging or exceeding $1 billion a year, you're not going to make it. Well, we're on track. It's the largest investment in coastal restoration and protection in the state's history. And as a result of all these changes that you've seen over the last few years and continuing in this session, Moody's recently upgraded our creditworthiness so that we actually will save money on what we have to borrow. And I'm glad that they recognize that our efforts to make sure that we are matching our expenditures with recurring revenue when they're recurring expenditures and so forth, because it is a responsible way to budget. And in fact, this year, I think the number is $277 million of recurring revenue that's being spent on non-recurring expenditures, so that we go above and beyond to make sure that we are being fiscally responsible. And I thank the legislature for working with me on that. We also made some small positive changes when it comes to insurance reform and the way renters are treated in the aftermath of disaster. I have to say I'm disappointed that we didn't enact more of the bills that were presented to the legislature because I had sessions all over the state meeting with Louisianans who were business owners and homeowners and who, because of hurricanes Laura, Delta, or Ida, had sustained damages. And their insurance companies, quite frankly, just didn't step up to the plate. They didn't get the benefit of the premium dollars they'd been paying, in many cases, for decades. So we could have done better. And now we're at the start of a new hurricane season. I just hope that and pray that history doesn't repeat itself, both in terms that we don't have another hurricane this year, and that if we do, that the insurers will treat their policyholders fairly. Overall, I am very happy with the work that was accomplished this session. You know, I talked about Senator Rick Ward's farewell speech a little earlier, and he said something else, that it's okay to disagree with one another sometimes, but you can still work together for what's best for people. And then you can still be friends when you have policy differences. Now, I'm going to say what I think we all know. That is getting harder and harder to do here in Baton Rouge, but it is still possible. And in fact, we are able to do that to a degree that you don't see in Washington. I pray we never, ever look like Washington, D.C. and the dysfunction that grips the nation's capital. The legislative process can be long and frustrating. I know that I used to be a legislator myself. And so I thank all of the legislators, and especially those who are standing with me today. We're all working for a common goal, that's to make life better for the people of Louisiana. A couple of other comments that I want to make, and then I'll take your questions. Because I suspect the first question somebody's going to ask me is about Senate Bill 44. I've allowed that bill to come along without my signature. Not because I thought the bill was good. You all know my views on it haven't changed. In the year since that bill was first put on my desk, there still hasn't been a single instance in Louisiana of a trans girl participating in sports. However, it was obvious to me after 2 years, when both the House and the Senate passed it by more than a 2/3 vote, and with conversations I had with legislators, especially this year because the scope of the bill was reduced at least slightly when they took out intramural sports, that Senate Bill 44 was going to become law whether or not I signed it or vetoed it. And I think it's unfortunate, but it is where we are. And I hope we can all get to a point soon where we realize that these young people are doing the very best that they can to survive. I just think we can be better than that bill. And unfortunately, I believe that the folks, and this is a nationwide effort, y'all know it, whether it's intended or not, the effect is to send a strong message to at least some of these young people that they shouldn't be who they think they are, who they believe they are, who they know that they are. And I find that very distressing. I do believe that we can be better than that. And we shouldn't pretend that there's unfairness when there's not. It's not happening in Louisiana. But if we want to talk about fairness for women, why don't we talk about equal pay? Where we're dead last in the country in terms of what we pay women relative to what we pay men. Why don't we start there? It's real, it's documented, and it's happening here to a degree it's not happening anywhere else in the country. In 7 straight years, I have asked the legislature to address that. They can't do it. But they can address something that is non-existent. That is unfortunate. The next thing I want to talk about is the decision that came out of the Middle District of Louisiana today, which found correctly that the maps adopted by the legislature and passed over my veto in terms of our congressional redistricting to violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The judge went further and said that we have until the 20th of June to pass a new map. That map needs to contain at least 2 minority districts, black majority districts, which is exactly what I said to you all, which is exactly what these people behind you said. And if you just do the math from June the 20th and you know that once a call is issued, you have to have at least 7 days before you can go into that session. And it takes about 6 days or so, if everything is coordinated, to be able to pass the bill. Subtract that from June 20th, you know we're right at the doorstep. So what I can tell you is that in the next day or so, I will be issuing a call for a special session to do exactly what the Middle District of Louisiana has told us to do, what is required by Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, but is required by basic fairness and basic math, and that is to come in and redraw the districts. And so I'll be doing that in the next day or two, because we don't have longer than that. And I just wanted to provide notice to these legislators who probably thought they were going to be going home for a while, and to the people across the state. So at this time, assuming I haven't answered all of the questions that you were going to ask me, I will take a few questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Governor. Out of the 3 possible locations for the new Mississippi River Bridge, do you have a preference on which one?
No. But I have a preference that we get the bridge in the right location and do it soon. And I'm very thankful for the $300 million. That's going to allow us to compete for discretionary grant funding coming from the U.S. Department of Transportation. And that's going to be very helpful. It also signals to the private sector that we're very serious about this as well. Quite frankly, that should have been $500, because you never win more in grant money than you have set aside for the project. So if we're wildly successful in this first round of grant applications, we'll win a couple $100 million, which is very helpful, but that'll bring us to where we should have been without any federal participation. This is going to be a very expensive project. When you look at constructing the bridge and tying it into Interstate 10 on both sides of the river, it's going to be about $3 billion. And so hopefully, and we do have another opportunity next year. I believe we'll have another opportunity to invest more money into it. Hopefully we will take advantage of that opportunity. There's just no doubt in my mind, and really nobody pushes back on this assertion. It is the #1 most important capacity infrastructure project in the state of Louisiana. So let's get the from 3 to 1, and let's get it built. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, you just detailed that you thought the ban on transgender women and girls participating in sports is harmful to people who are vulnerable. Can you explain why it doesn't send a mixed message that you're not willing to veto the bill, even if you got overruled?
Well, I think I explained my rationale. It became very clear to me after 2 years seeing the votes on both sides, and in the conversations that I had with a number of legislators, that bill was going to become law, regardless of what I did. And I think acknowledging that reality is important, but at the same time, the way I feel about the bill hasn't changed. What I say about the bill hasn't changed. I'm hopeful that we can take that off the table and then now start to focus on other things.
Do you not think it would have sent a message to people who feel like this bill is going to harm them, to have the highest elected official in the state say that he didn't approve
I hope
the bill?
the people who might feel that way receive the message that I just sent out. Yes, sir.
So legislation passed that would take public school money and give it to private or home schools programs for students that aren't reading at grade level. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, and if you were considering a veto.
Yeah, so I've told you all before in response to a question, I don't favor those bills. I've got a long history as governor, but before that is 8 years in the legislature of not favoring taking money from public schools and diverting it to private schools, parochial schools, home schools. If there's another way to fund something, yeah, I might be open to it, but that's not what I believe is right and best. We are primarily responsible for public schools with public money. And so not a bill that I will approach with an eye towards signing. However, I have committed to meet with the author of that bill and give her an opportunity to tell me why I'm wrong and why she's right. Yes, ma'am.
What is your response to Senator Jackson's bill passing that criminalizes abortion to a degree and does not have exceptions for incest and rape?
Well, first of all, you heard me say the other day that I favor those exceptions, and I do it. It's not easy for people, and I understand that. I've got a long history as a legislator and as a governor, being pro-life myself. However, I believe that the force of law should not compel a lady or a girl to carry a rapist baby to term. And I think to ask that question is to answer it. But the first part of your question, this law doesn't do that. That law has been on the books since 2006. This bill that you refer to doesn't change anything in the trigger law. As you all know, we've had about 5 decades of bill enactment since Roe versus Wade became the law of the land. And I believe Senator Jackson's bill was an effort to reconcile all of those various enactments so that you had more consistency and less of a problem in terms of different definitions, different penalties, different things like that. But, and quite frankly, the White House got this wrong today, and others got it wrong today, and maybe they read The Advocate, I'm not sure, because they got it wrong today too. The bill that does this, the law that does this, has been on the books since 2006. Yes?
Given your position on a lack of exceptions for rape or incest, do you regret signing into law the heartbeat ban in 2019 and the 15-week ban the year before that? It didn't include those provisions?
No. Didn't include the provisions, but I wish they would have. Yes.
Governor, does your comment about Sharon Hewitt's bill also apply to Rhonda Butler's bill because of what you said about the concept of moving money out of public schools?
Well, that's my approach when I look at the bill. You know, if you've been paying attention over the last few days, literally hundreds of bills, and many of them with significant amendments at the very end of the process, are now coming up to the fourth floor. And so it is a painstaking, long process to pull those bills out and look at them each individually, which is what we do, which is one of the reasons why I almost never signal to you what I'm going to do with the bill before I actually get it up here, because I need to be able to read it and see what amendments are on it, what I thought may have been in it that isn't, and vice versa. So I don't have a comment on Representative Butler's bill, but just know that generally speaking, I do not favor taking public dollars out of public schools and sending them to education that is not public. And this is, I've been very consistent on this. This goes back to my opposition as a member of the House of Representatives to the voucher bills, for example. Yes.
In 2016, you had mentioned you had wanted to see a modest increase in minimum wage. Mm-hmm. Well, 6 years have passed, we still haven't seen it, and with gas prices going up, does it disappoint you that we have not seen that yet?
It does, but you know, I recognize that there's very few people out there working for minimum wage. I'll give you the dollar figure in case you don't know it. It's $7.25 an hour, and has been since 2009. Because we don't have our own minimum wage. So we use the federal minimum wage, and it hasn't been changed since 2009. Nobody can think that that's reasonable. Even before the current inflationary period that we've been in for the last number of months, you couldn't have thought that that was reasonable. And the business folks here in Louisiana Lobby and others are always against that bill. They don't even want Louisianans to be able to vote because they know we will become another state to adopt a higher minimum wage. And I find it offensive, quite frankly. And it's right there with the equal pay for women. That we know that 60, 70% of the people in Louisiana think the minimum wage should be higher. Nobody thinks we should continue to wait on Congress, and yet there's no action downstairs, year after year after year. But guess what? We're going to go back into session in April, and I can promise you there will be an equal pay bill. There will be a minimum wage bill. We will not stop because it's just wrong. It is just wrong. We owe our people more than that. How many children do you think we trap in poverty because we don't pay their parents what they should be paid when they go to work? And ironically, the same people who don't want to pay them better are the ones most likely to vote against any assistance for them. Doesn't make sense to me. Yes?
We heard about 30 instruments relating to vaccinations, most of which failed. But in the course of that, we had a lot of discussions and hearings in which we heard a lot of misinformation. Can you talk about the way that the legitimization of that misinformation can have an impact on public health?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt but that our vaccination rates here in Louisiana would be much higher, and that public health would be much better served if more people were vaccinated. And the reason that many people are not vaccinated is because they have fallen victim to misinformation. And that misinformation seems to be choreographed and coordinated. It's available readily on social media and otherwise. And it is easily demonstrated to be misinformation, false, absolutely false. But it is still taking root, and it's really sad to see that happen because we know that these vaccines are effective. They prevent against serious illness, hospitalization, and death. We're right at, 18,000 deaths in Louisiana? So, I mean, it is sad, and for legislators to introduce bills that actually support, that buttress the misinformation, that use all the misinformation talking points to try to advance the bills is pretty sad. And I'm very thankful that the legislature did, in fact, block most of those bills. And quite frankly, there are some Democrats behind me who are responsible for that, and I want to thank them. But they didn't block them all. But you know that I cannot allow a bill to become law that would just further undermine public confidence in the vaccines that are so critical to our success in waging war against COVID, because that's what this is. Tyler, I wonder what took you so long.
There are going to be people who say you actually didn't have a very good session, that all this investment that you're touting is thanks to money from Washington and the post-pandemic recovery, and that you were not able to pass any major policy prescriptions. What would you say to those people?
I would say look back at what was going on in this state in 2015 and just compare and contrast. It's pretty simple. I mean, we had excess dollars, didn't come from Washington. We had surplus dollars, didn't come from Washington. We have the lowest unemployment right now in Louisiana ever measured. So that's my answer.
Last one?
Yes, sir.
You mentioned the other day, you think there's some sort of middle ground to be found on gun control and some legislation to make our schools safer. Why is there no momentum either or calls from you or from the legislature to call a special session and pass laws related to gun control or school safety or something that can address these school shootings and mass shootings that keep happening?
Well, first of all, we're busy fighting bills that would allow folks without a background check, without any training to carry concealed firearms without a permit. That'll tell you where we are in Louisiana, but we're successful on that front. I do believe that we need to look in things like expanding background checks. I don't know that there should be any commercial purchases of firearms, whether they happen at a typical retail establishment, whether they're online, whether they're at a gun show. They ought to all have to have a background check. And then I think we have to look at red flag laws. How do we take guns from people who have demonstrated that they are a serious risk of harm to themselves and others? And there are some other states who really do that extremely well. And that's where we have to look, because if it is true, as so many claim, that guns don't kill people, people kill people, maybe we ought to make sure that the wrong people don't have guns. You do that with background checks and red flag laws. And so I do believe that that is what we ought to be about here in Louisiana. We certainly shouldn't be allowing everybody to carry a concealed weapon. And I get sort of amused at times, but it really isn't amusing when you think about it, that they say this is constitutional carry. If they thought they had a constitutional right for this, they wouldn't be in this building, they'd be in the courts. Nobody believes that there's a constitutional right for that. And I believe in public safety, and I believe in following law enforcement's wishes on that. Those are our everyday heroes, those men and women who are out there patrolling the streets and the highways, enforcing the laws, and they know that their job becomes exponentially harder and more dangerous if everybody they come in contact with is likely to have a weapon. The second thing I'm going to say about that, and then I may or may not take another question, is it's perplexing to me that you all know that I have had a long history here in Baton Rouge. And at no point has the National Rifle Association even endorsed against me. And I've always answered their questionnaires that I do not favor removing the permit requirement for concealed carry. And yet, all of a sudden, they changed their position on that issue, and they start telling people that I'm an enemy of the Second Amendment. And I point that out just to illustrate just how ridiculous things have gotten, how extreme things have gotten. I've not changed my position. The NRA changed its position, and all of a sudden, I'm an enemy of the NRA because of that one issue. I'm sorry, enemy of the Second Amendment because of that one issue. And it's just another example of how we've got to get away from all of this extremism. It is not serving us well. Sam, you get the last question.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, you laid out some solutions, and then you said, we're fighting this, this permitless carry. Are you indicating that you don't think the legislature is amenable to these solutions you've laid out regarding red flag laws and background checks and that sort of thing?
The truth is, I don't know, but you're not until you are. How many Buffaloes do there have to be? How many Uvaldes do there have to be? How much gun violence does there have to be here in Louisiana before things change? And so, we'll have more sessions coming up. I suspect you're going to see, and I think if you go back and look at the bills that have been introduced, there have been a fair number of bills about gun safety as well. They just haven't gone as far as some of the bills that seek to go in the opposite direction. Look, thank you all for being here, and I'll use Tyler's question to close this out. This has been a great session for the state of Louisiana. And I am excited about where we are. I'm an optimist by nature. You all know that. But when I look at where we are relative to where we were when I became governor, there is a world of difference. And it's happened because we have worked together on these critical things. And if there is one thing that we need to be very diligent about, very disciplined about, it is investing in education so that more people have opportunity. That is the mortal enemy of all of the ills that plague this state and plague other states, by the way. And so with record investments in education, I can't help but be pleased and optimistic about our future. Thank you all. Stay tuned. You may see a call for a special session here pretty shortly. Thank you all, and God bless.